Just finished Blood on the Tracks Volume 1. Apologies if this part of the video has some terrible audio quality. I am just recording in my classroom because I wanted to get my ideas out quickly before they evaporated and I can't remember what I wrote down in my notes. But I am using the Cawpile system for these reviews just because I wanted to have something a little bit more objective in rating them to make sure that the thing that I felt was strongest really did move on to the next round and it wasn't just like a spur of the moment bias. So I'm going to break down my thoughts on these just real quick. So for characters, it ended up with an overall 7. For me, they're very competent and realistic characters. But there's not a whole lot to grab onto in this first volume. A lot of this is just like establishing the atmosphere and establishing the characters. And because it's presented in such a realistic way, a lot of the characterization is so indirect that it's hard to really identify with anybody or gravitate toward any of the characters. There's some excellent use of using shading and different angles and close-ups, like extreme close-ups on the mother in particular, to establish this creepy vibe to her character before the big event that happens toward the end of the volume. Thought that was incredibly effective. But I put that more in like the art style rather than the characterization. The setting gets a 9 out of 10. It presents a very stark reality, like very true to life, and I think that was its intention. And so again, some of the detriments of the character, the indirect characterization, the way that it's hard to tell exactly how characters feel and exactly like what is the different relationships between these different characters, I think benefits this idea of having a very realistic setting because no one's standing around explaining something to you. For the writing style and art, there's a lot of use of hatch shading. It's used to convey a lot of tension. A lot of faces are like shadowed over to create this sense of like unease almost. There's excellent art in this book, both for the human characters, for animals, for food, presenting a realistic setting. And so I gave the writing style / art a 10. I felt like it was subtle, but immensely effective for the story that they're trying to tell. Plot is, I think, the lowest that I'm rating for this particular book. I gave it a 6. So much is held back in this first volume. Again, with the very indirect characterization. It also has a very slow pace at the start to like build up these characters and build up this tension. I'm hoping that picks up a little bit in the future. Create a bit of the intrigue, which I am giving a 10 out of 10. That lack of plot, that lack of direct characterization is very compelling when you're talking about crafting a mystery, because it's very hard to tell what do characters know about each other, how do characters feel about each other, what are their motivations. So much is obscured from the reader, and so I feel like that creates a lot of intrigue, that creates a lot of interest. For relationships, I gave a 7. Again, with so much left unsaid, it's hard to infer the truth of the relationships. Some questions I had even at the end of this first volume is Seichi scared of his mom before the big event that happens toward the end of this volume? Like, he seems a little bit like, it seems a little off-putting, their reactions, their relationship with one another even early on in the book. And then how does he feel about his cousin who's coming over and visiting often? How does he feel about his love interest, Fukishi? Again, because so much is held back, it's hard to figure out what are these relationships supposed to be. And then finally, for enjoyment, my overall enjoyment I put as an 8 out of 10. I feel like this is an excellent start to a thriller. It maybe moves a little bit too slow for me and leaves a little bit too much up to interpretation, but I feel like that is doing an excellent job in crafting that tone that the author is going for, the mood the author is going for, and creating that intrigue for moving forward. So overall, with the Cawpile system, Blood on the Tracks is going to get an 8.14. So I'll be taking a look at Demon Slayer later today and see how that stacks up. And then we will declare our winner for this first bracket. Finished reading Demon Slayer, and again wanted to talk about it before these ideas escape my mind and it becomes just a mess. So this one overall I feel across the board scored lower than Blood on the Tracks, but I think they make for an interesting contrast with one another. I'll just go through here and give a couple of notes on some of the things I noticed and felt as I was going through. So with characters, Tanjiro, there's not a whole lot that I enjoy about him, to be honest. He's super accommodating. At the beginning, he immediately jumps into like, I'm going to find the cure for my sister, even with complete ignorance of what the demon world is even like, because he seemed like he didn't even realize that demons existed until this incident happens to him. This does something that I also feel Attack on Titan is guilty of, in that it introduces us to this family and tries to make us care about them with very little interaction, and then they're just immediately gone. And I don't feel anything for those characters because I barely even know them. I got one character's name down, and then they were just, I was like, oh, well, that character is irrelevant now. We have the initial Demon Slayer that he comes into contact with, the guy he trains with. Orokodaki is probably the most interesting character in this first volume, in my opinion. He's the enigmatic trainer who is showing Tanjiro how to fight demons, and he has a line, I don't want to see another child die. So he set this task that he didn't even think Tanjiro would be able to succeed in doing, specifically because he is this like aloof, grizzled character who is tired of seeing people march to their deaths. So again, I felt like that was the most interesting character, and it's this like minor background character that I'd be much more interested in hearing his life story. I gave characters a 4. I'm using 5 as like the average. I'm doing my best to get out of my teacher mentality of 7 being the average. So I felt like this was below average. Characters introduced and then eliminated and then gone too quickly. Characters a little bit too, not enough development with the ones that we are introduced to at the moment. Not enough going on. The setting is vaguely Japan history. They do mention a emperor at one point, so I'm sure you could pinpoint like what year this is meant to be happening in. But it's basically like rural Japan, but also demons exist, but also people don't realize that demons exist, despite demons murdering a lot of people. It's bizarre, and I wonder if it's explored later in the manga, but it does not work because of the extent of the things you see demons do even within this first volume. I gave that a 5. Again, it was middle of the road Japan, but also with demons. For the writing and art, I talked about, I wrote notes about how I felt the action shots were a little bit busy. There's a lot of use of like streaks across the paper for sword cuts or for characters moving very quickly. There were a few times where I had to look at two panels back and forth a few times to even tell what had happened. And so that's a problem. And then from a writing standpoint, there's way too much internal monologue and way too much of these characters just basically saying what happened. So writing and art gets a 5. Again, middle of the road, kind of what I expect from an opening shonen manga series. Okay. The plot, it actually starts with what seems like a flash forward into a later part of the series, which I found kind of odd. I realized that Japanese comics are not written the same way that American comics are, and so you've got to have like within just any given chapter enough to keep the reader going to the next week. Whereas with American comics at this point, they're mostly written for trade, so you have more of like an overarching story. But I found that flash forward an odd choice. Again, ramps up way too quickly with the family. And then the internal monologue is hurting it, especially when you had a second character have internal monologue, and it used the exact same format for the internal monologue. So there's no distinction between the two. And I can see that being very confusing, not knowing who is supposed to be talking in a given point. His training, Tanjiro's training, is kind of another one of these things that is like, it moves too quickly. He's there for, I think, 2 years training, and it's just like, I did this, I fell all day today, and then like another journal entry where like, I practiced sword slashing so hard that like my arms felt like they were gonna fall off. It's a lot of telling and not showing, and that's problematic. I got a 5. Again, like as an average, 5 being an average, like just straightforward plot. Nothing that I felt was so egregious that I needed to dip any further down, but nothing that was very innovative or compelling. As a result, intrigue gets a 3. Intrigue is incredibly low for this series. We don't even know if it's possible for Tanjiro to save his sister. And so and that, despite that being the character's focus, that is not the story's focus. The story's focus is him getting stronger, him going through training, him fighting demons. And so it doesn't really build up anything to like hook you in. It's just watching him go from point A to point B. And because most of those are shown so indirectly and shown so briefly, there's nothing to really get invested in this first volume. There's nothing to really hold on to. And then finally, relationships. I gave this one a 4, again, because of the lack of the seeming importance of his family and of his relationship with his sister, but the failure at a storytelling level to make that integrated into anything else that's happening in the story. The death of his family at the beginning of the comic and the lack of focus on this relationship beyond a couple of like silly things that he tries to do to help his sister, the inability to weave her into any of the other story beats. For the entirety of his training, she's asleep. It's basically like just like ignoring that she exists. And so I feel like that was a real detriment if that was meant to be a significant element to your manga, that you don't have that character active as an active participant for 80% of, well, as an active participant for probably 90% of this comic. That's a problem. So my overall enjoyment was a 5. I liked it. I mean, despite all my criticisms that I've just been giving it, I feel like I'd probably pick up more of this if I was just like looking for something to casually get into. The future fights might be fun, and certainly high school Traben, younger Traben, would have picked this over Blood on the Tracks any day of the week. Like, what's even happening in Blood on the Tracks? It's just a bunch of people talking. But now I feel the opposite. This is just another very tropey shonen series. It didn't do anything to grab me in this first volume. Slightly in the future, Traben here, to say that I realized I teased an interesting contrast between these two manga and then did not go on to explain that contrast. We have a series whose ambiguity almost drives me crazy with how unclear the relationships between the characters are, but uses that to build more intrigue and more interest in the central mystery, contrasted with a shonen series that over-explains the action that is happening to the point where it is distracting. I might argue that, of course, Demon Slayer has to explain more. It's set in a fantasy world, a fictional world. I would counter with the idea that manga is a visual medium, and if you cannot tell me your story through actions, if you need your characters to narrate the thing that I just saw, that you are falling short of my expectations for the medium. It might be a thing where the mangaka was new and wasn't sure like what all he could let go and how to express the things that he wanted to express. But for that opening volume, it is a little bit of a disappointment. So that's the thing that I found interesting comparing the two of these is the different frustrations I had with them, but how one of those frustrations actually worked to the manga's benefit in creating more of a mystery that it was going for, whereas the other was just tedious. Ultimately, when adjusted to a 10-point scale, this is going to get a 4.4. I'm using the raw scores for the brackets, so just because they're easier to enter into this program. So the raw score here would be a 31 for Demon Slayer and a 57 for Blood on the Tracks. So as a result, Blood on the Tracks is going to get the win here. It is moving on to the second round, and it will face whatever the winner is in the second bracket. I'm going to get started on that second bracket probably this afternoon. I will come back again probably in a few days and upload a video letting you know what my thoughts are with that second pair of books. Hope you guys are having a good day, and until next time, take care.